crowd interrupted them again, responding to the final mech choices. Burke's predictable Warhammer was a 70-ton monster of a mech, an icon, perhaps a bit under-armored but bristling with paired massive particle projection cannons, medium lasers, small lasers, and machine guns, all topped off with a short-range missile pack, and he'd been riding it on a winning streak. True to the machine's name, he'd brutally bludgeoned foe after foe into submission with sledgehammer shots from the huge PPCs, then closed the gap and chewed up whatever remained with secondary weapons. His track record made him the clear favorite according to the Sings and their odds, even more so after Shotaro finalized his choice. Violent Inception, Shrapnel number 17, page 113, by Russell Zimmerman. If I say the Warhammer needs no introduction, I don't have to put in the effort of coming up with a clever one, right? Instead, I want to begin with a story that I have yet to share with the channel. While I have talked about my introduction to the tabletop Battletech game being thanks to parents who weren't keen on magic and wizardry, but were fine with interstellar stompy mechs, my entry to the Warhammer franchise began at roughly the same time. I don't recall who bought the game for our family 386 25MHz PC, but I do remember the box sitting on the shelf and its striking red and black Warhammer art on the front. Mechwarrior was our first opportunity to play the game in first person, and we played the heck out of it. Sure, it was clunky, you couldn't change the mech loadouts, and the enemy AI mindlessly marched toward an objective even if you were shooting it in the back, but it was the closest we could get to being real mech warriors. Between Mechwarrior and the 3rd edition Battletech box, the Warhammer was the poster child for my foundational Battletech years. This is part of why I've been waiting on doing the Warhammer video. I wanted to be good enough at this that I could do the mech justice. If I screwed something up in the Urban Mech video, that's fine. But this has to be good, so don't mess this up, Mechfrog. At the dawn of the 26th century, the battle mech was seen as the key to achieving battlefield supremacy. Once the genie was let out of the bottle, every major house and tin pot dictator wanted his or her own legion of battle mechs with which to crush anyone who opposed them. When the designers at Starcore Industries saw the request for, quote, a mobile mech with enough firepower to destroy or severely damage any mech of the same weight class or lower, they were savvy enough to know that they could take what worked from earlier designs and craft something even better. The two primary inspirations were the BKX-7K Battle Axe and the HMH 3D Hammer Hands. Both were produced by Achernar Battle Mechs on New Avalon and had strengths as well as some pretty glaring flaws. For example, the Battle Axe's twin PPC setup made it incredibly dangerous, but without adequate heat sinks, firing both, even staggered slightly, resulted in heat that could not be wicked off fast enough to keep the mech combat effective. Additionally, the 9 tons of armor was judged to be too little to keep the Battle Axe in the fight. As far as the 75-ton Hammer Hands goes, this heavy mech was deemed a successful design and adopted by the Federated Sons. Though the weapons loadout was much more ballistics-oriented, just a glance at the mech shows strong similarities with what would eventually be known as the Warhammer. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? The Starcore design, christened the WHM-6R Warhammer, was just different enough from the Hammer Hands to avoid ending up in court. Ah, capitalism wins again. The proposal for this 70-ton death delivery system was approved, and the Terran hegemony was eager to offer a contract. They were savvy enough to see that the WHM-6R could run circles around the best that the great houses could produce. It wasn't long before the Warhammer was stomping off the assembly lines and into their first deployments in 2515. Crafted from an in-house Starcore 100 frame around a Vox 280 fusion engine, the Warhammer 6R's top speed was 64 km per hour. While this 460 movement profile wasn't going to turn any heads during the Succession Wars, at the time of first production it was considered quite swift for a 70-ton battle mech. Its 10 tons of Leviathan Plus standard plate armor was enough to keep the mech in the fight, though it's clear with this one that offensive power was to take precedence on our opportunity cost chart. The 2 Donald particle projection cannons split between the arms dominated the build, though they were backed up at close range by a Holly SRM-6 set into the right torso and paired with medium and small lasers on each side. Finally, a pair of Sperry Browning machine guns were added along with 1 ton of center torso stored ammunition to deal with bothersome infantry or to chew up the internals of a mech you've already cracked open. It all added up to a beautiful mess of a build that could oddly enough have a tendency to work out. The 6R's 18 single heat sinks weren't enough to completely handle all the heat generated, but many of the common combinations of weapons were easily viable. Firing both PPCs while on the run left the 6R Warhammer at 4+ into the red, which was entirely manageable by holding off on one of the PPCs on a later turn. At closer range, choices are going to have to be made. Following its first deployments, the Warhammer quickly became a favorite of mech warriors who appreciated the ability to quickly wear down equal opponents and to cut down lighter foes. When it first encountered the Fed Sun's Hammerhands mechs, the Davion unit suffered so greatly that the Hammerhands earned the unflattering nickname Poor Man's Warhammer. While it was definitely not a bad mech, the Hammerhands was an example of just how quickly battle mech technology was evolving. A powerhouse battle mech in one conflict might end up being the gigantic rusted paperweight in the next. Over the next half a millennia, the Warhammer endured countless wars and petty conflicts. Following the collapse of the Star League, some Warhammers left the Inner Sphere with Kerensky's Exodus, ending up the basis for one of the best 2C clan battle mechs to ever terrorize a battlefield. Back in the Inner Sphere, the Warhammer saw service in every successor state military due to the production lines on Sudeten, Emrys IV, Pinard, Taurus, and others. Even the Taurian Concordat would eventually be able to set up their own Warhammer production line for a domestic supply. To describe the Warhammer as a hit does it a disservice. Often the highlight of battle reports and holovids, people across the Inner Sphere could identify the Warhammer at a glance. Out here in the real world, the Warhammer reigned as the Battletech poster boy on the Battle Droids box and both the second and third editions of the Game of Armored Combat. Though it would eventually have to yield the stage due to the now legendary legal issues involving artwork, the Warhammer remained one of the best known battle mechs in the IP. Back in universe, it was reported that no factory that began production of the Warhammer ever had to scale it back due to a lack of demand. That is impressive considering we're talking about half a millennia of production. Rice brought the Warhammer to a halt between Mahon's Stalker and Shelley Sung's Orion. Further down the draw, he saw great clouds of dust churned up into the air. Dark shapes moved in the haze. Towering humanoid shapes with the occasional glint of reflected sunlight from weapons or armor. Rice pulled up a magnified image on his primary display and studied it briefly before opening the command channel again. Command 1, this is Baker 1 Actual. I've got a positive visual in a 3rd Battalion of the 22nd Amaris Dragoons. They're about to hit the left flank. Contact in 3 minutes. Tactics of Betrayal, page 114 by David L. McCullough. Battletech, 25 Years of Art and Fiction. When deployed, the Warhammer tended to show up in frontline lances, heading up advances into enemy territory. The combination of twin PPCs and the closer range weaponry allowed the battle mech to be lethal at all ranges. With its strong reputation, it's no surprise that the Warhammer ended up being the preferred ride for many prominent mech warriors. This included some with notorious aggressive personalities, but also those who understood warfare as closer to a chess match with calculated advantages and swapping initiative. We're going to take some time to see an example of each as we march down the timeline. Full disclosure before you yell at me, we're not going to cover every Warhammer variant in today's video. By my own admittedly lackluster counting skills, there are about 30 variants of the design, and trying to hit them all would make this video several hours long. I don't want to do that, and you likely don't want to sit through that either. Instead, I'd like to highlight variants that have a particularly interesting fluff, or are fun to use on the tabletop, or offer some insight to better understand the battle mech. I've assembled a crack team of a single burnout in his mid-40s to make that determination, and I promise I will do a good job. Okay, I'll do an adequate job. I am a Gen Xer, what do you want from me? The first variants we need to cover are the 3 successor state variants, which were introduced within 5 years of each other in the early 29th century. The first was the Warhammer 6L, and it was House Liao's attempt to tweak the design to fit a particular fondness for setting things on fire. Oh, never change. It wasn't structurally different from the 6R besides the swap out of machine guns for a pair of flamers split between the side torsos. While the damage output doesn't change, heat generation was increased in exchange for a lack of ammunition stored in the center torso. I like the 6L and would happily swap it for the 6R in most circumstances. Well done, Capellans. House Kurita went in another direction with their Succession Wars variant, designated the Warhammer 6K. Once again, the 2 machine guns and their ammunition were sacrificed, but instead of different weapons, they added 2 additional heatsinks, bringing the total to 20. This significantly improved the ability of the mech to sustain fire on targets. Firing both PPCs on the run left the 6K at only 2+ into the red, making it possible to fire both again the next turn and still not suffer that first heat-related penalty. Not too shabby. The third of the quick Succession Wars variants was the Federated Suns Warhammer 6D. It also was the most substantively different of the trio, sacrificing not only the machine guns but also the SRM-6 launcher in order to add 4 tons of additional armor and 2 extra heatsinks, bringing the total to 20. The 6D was a tougher version of the already rugged battle mech, and it could be more consistently a problem in the mid and long range with those PPCs. Sacrificing the iconic SRM-6 pack on the shoulder hurts a little bit, but we can't have everything we want in life, can we, Veruca? The park was not devoid of enemies either. The Armstrong autocannon on Fraser's Shadowhawk fell into firing position over its shoulder and spat out a salvo of slugs, followed by a flight of long-range missiles. The target, a Warhammer standing waist-deep in a small lake some 400 meters to the south, responded with its dual PPCs. One of the bright particle beams incinerated a tree next to the Shadowhawk. The other hit the dark blue hawk squarely in the chest, scorching away a good share of its armor. Feather vs. Mountain, Rise and Shine, page 282 by Stefan A. Frabartolo. Battlecore Anthology, Volume 7. It's interesting to me that out of all 4 Succession Wars options, the most famous Warhammer Mechwarrior chose to run the original 6R. The legendary Natasha Kerensky made a name for herself along with the rest of the Wolf's Dragoons when they made their mysterious appearance in the Inner Sphere in the early years of the 31st century. Of course, we all now know the Dragoons were an advanced intelligence gathering operation sent by the clans to sort out just how difficult conquest could be. In reality, they were a delaying tactic by Clan Wolf to somehow postpone Operation Revival for as long as possible. Though she was a very skilled and accomplished clan warrior already by the end of the 30th century, Natasha's career had stalled due to a variety of reasons, including her age. Approaching and then crossing over into her 30s, Natasha's glory days were more and more likely behind her, at least until the opportunity arose to travel along with the Dragoons into the Inner Sphere in 3004. Determined to turn this trip, staffed with misfits, into an opportunity, Natasha immediately dedicated herself to mastering the art of warfare. As the Dragoons worked their way through contracts in each of the major houses, Natasha's notoriety increased and she cultivated a femme fatale persona which holovids and printed materials played up, much to the joy of her fans. Natasha Kerensky picked up nicknames like the Black Widow, Queen of Mechwarriors, and the First Lady of Death. While her legend grew, she and her fellow Dragoons racked up victory after victory across the Inner Sphere. Kerensky originally chose a Marauder for the mission, but when that was shot out from under her during an inopportune moment with the equally legendary Bounty Hunter, the replacement was a stock Warhammer 6R. Over the years, rumors of the Warhammer she named Black Lady, containing secret Star League technology, spread as a way to explain her almost supernatural ability to defeat her enemies. These rumors shifted to accusations that the mech was actually kitted out with clan technology once the Dragoons shared their connection to the invading clans. Those in the know, including Jamie Wolf, understood that the Dragoons resisted the temptation to deploy using clan technology as it would risk too much should a machine fall into enemy hands. Natasha Kerensky and her Warhammer remained a threat until she returned to the clans. When she fought her final battle and was rendered into charcoal at the hands of Joanna, the Mechwarrior too angry to die, it was within a direwolf and not Natasha's trusted Warhammer 6R. The first Taurian mech to come into sight was a regular-looking archer. Lennox smiled and brought his crosshairs down. The archer was a poor mech to put in the lead, and he intended to remind them why. "Let's get it stuck in," he said, and fired. The classic Warhammer, Marksons and Yorimotos for instance, carried the battle-proven Donal particle projection cannons. The newer models used extended range PPCs like the Johnston high speeds built into the Warhammer's forearms. At Lennox's urging, each vomited a stream of high-energy ions downrange. One missed high, spending its scion lightning across the sky. The other drilled into the archer's chest, vaporizing armor and forcing the 70-ton battlemech back a step. The Gulf of Reason, page 144, by Jason Schmetzer. By the 3040s, all the most common Warhammers were showing their age. As more and more in-production battlemechs received fancy new Helm memory core upgrades, the Warhammer was at risk of being left behind. Surprisingly, it was Ronin Incorporated, which was based in the planet Wallace within the Free Worlds League, that stepped up with the new Warhammer variant. It was a surprise because up to that point, Ronin Inc. was a small-time player in the battlemech market. Reports show that it was only producing 5 Warhammers per year, which was paltry in comparison to others around the inner sphere. Still, sometimes luck favors the bold, and in 3047, Ronin announced the production of a brand new Warhammer variant designated the WHM-7M. At a glance, it looked quite similar to the 6 line of variants, with the same speed and without messing with the configuration for the 10 tons of standard plate armor. However, Ronin's engineers understood the assignment for the Warhammer when they upgraded the 18 single heatsinks to the double strength variety. Doubling the heat dissipation for the 7M allowed for the upgrade of the 2 Donal PPCs to the Fusagon Longtooth extended range particle projection cannons. This significantly improved the power of the mech thanks to having no minimum range and a shifted medium range out to 14 hexes. The 2 medium lasers from the original 6 series were not touched, nor was the ubiquitous SRM-6 launcher on the shoulder fed by a single ton of ammunition. The mech's small lasers were sacrificed along with one of the machine guns in order to add a Lindblad shotgun anti-missile system in the left torso fed by a single ton of ammunition. While it would easily be possible to imagine an even more substantive upgrade with ferrofibrous or endosteel buying more mass for additional goodies, the 7M represents a good faith effort to deal with the most pressing issue that the battlemech had over the past 500 years. Once the genie was out of the bottle, the next 4 decades would see roughly 24 more variants, each competing for the title of Ideal Warhammer. Just 3 years later, after the 7M's launch, Olivetti Weaponry threw their hat into the ring with a new variant designated the 7S. It required completely retooling their Sudeten assembly line, which was considered a good investment at the time. However, if you're looking at the date 3050 and seeing Sudeten in the same sentence, you know that the Jade Falcons might have something to say about the viability of Lyran long-term planning. Had everything gone to plan, the Sudeten line was set to produce a Warhammer that also benefited from 18 double heatsinks and paired ERPPCs. However, Olivetti went further with it, pulling the SRM-6, standard medium lasers, and machine guns in favor of newer gear. This included 2 medium pulse lasers and 2 Streak SRM-2s, each split between the side torsos. Between the 7M and the 7S, one's pick would likely fall to personal preference. While the 7M was slightly more survivable thanks to the anti-missile system, the 7S could more easily fend off bothersome light and medium mechs that wandered too close. Both variants retained ammunition in their center torsos, which was a slight concern, especially the 50 rounds of Streak SRM-2 ammunition, which would feel like an endless supply in all but the longest campaigns. Morgan looked up and sighed heavily. Believe me, Katrina, when I tell you Yorinaga's return to duty, it's palpable. I knew he was back months before Dan came to Zanaya, Morgan faltered. I've never imagined Patrick would get caught in the crossfire. Years ago on Mallory's World, Yorinaga Kurita and I started something. It began in 3013 when tattered remnants of the Davion 4th Guards and 2 companies of the Kellhounds held off the Second Sword of Light while the other Davion troops evacuated Ian Davion and pried his body out of his broken mech. Yorinaga had killed Ian, but we prevented him from taking home any trophy. 3 years later, again on Mallory's World, Yorinaga and I met. Morgan paused and stared off into space. We fought, and I learned a lot about myself in that fight. I fear what I learned, to be very honest, and I feel the seeds of the same terrible thing in Yorinaga. While both of us remained in exile, nothing could happen. Now we'll be drawn together, inexorably, and our fight must eventually take place. Morgan shrugged. There is no other way. Warrior, Repost. The Warrior Trilogy, Book 2, pages 137 and 138, by Michael A. Stackpole. When Yorinaga Kurita was born in 2980, he was instantly burdened by the responsibility and high expectations that came with the surname. His place as a distant cousin of Coordinator Hohiro suggested a life of privilege mixed with danger. Being considered in the running to possibly take over as Warlord of the Combine someday was a great way to end up in the crosshairs of others who wanted the position. Thankfully, Yorinaga was able to establish himself as a capable warrior, and for the most part he avoided the political landmines set in his path, at least for a time. Yorinaga graduated from the Sun Zhang Mechwarrior Academy at 21 and quickly earned a reputation for excellent tactical battlefield awareness and an inflexible code of honor, which some found frustrating. Through distinguished service in the Third Succession War, he moved up the ranks and soon saw command of an entire battalion. In 3013, when 2 regiments of the Second Sword of Light dropped onto Mallory's world, it kicked the beehive of the Federated Suns. First Prince Ian Davion led the reinforcements that headed to the planet to boot the Combine back off-world. The fighting on Mallory's world was intense, but gradually the Combine forces gained the upper hand. Eventually, the First Prince was cornered and he sent his forces on while he held a narrow pass. When Yorinaga arrived and witnessed Ian Davion destroy a lance of mechs, his rigid code of honor demanded he give the First Prince the opportunity to die in a duel rather than being deluged by the dragon. Sure enough, Yorinaga helped the First Prince shuffle the mortal coil, and in doing so, his star brightened significantly. It's not every day that someone takes out a leader of a great house. Ultimately, Yorinaga ended up leading the Second Sword of Light, and in 3016 the unit clashed with the Kellhounds. Much of the rest of Yorinaga's life was spent wrapped up in conflict with Morgan Kell and his Kellhounds. The 2 men met in duels on multiple occasions. In the first, Yorinaga used his Warhammer masterfully to drop Morgan's archer to its knees. At the last moment, Morgan's desperate alpha strike with LRMs at point-blank range knocked the Warhammer out of the fight. After Yorinaga ended up killing Morgan's brother Patrick, they clashed again in another duel. Though both warriors very nearly sent their mechs into shutdown on the planet's intense heat, Morgan managed to win out and defeat Yorinaga for a second and final time. Just 2 years later, Yorinaga undertook the ritual of seppuku and ended his life. His Warhammer 6R was a family possession which had been passed down from its original construction in 2672. It was continually repaired and rebuilt and briefly converted to a 6K before Yorinaga decided to revert it to the original loadout. Though it had its share of quirks and issues over the years, the mech continued to serve the dragon even after Yorinaga's passing.
Yorinaga swallowed hard. I returned to Luthien and reported what I saw and felt to the coordinator. I then resigned my commission and asked to be allowed to commit seppuku. The coordinator exiled me to the Zen monastery on Echo 5 while continuing to refuse my request. 11 years later, he finally agreed to grant it, provided I first create and lead our elite unit, the Genyosha. Akira pointed off towards the rubble representing Ride. We will meet the Kellhounds then. Yorinaga nodded gravely. Yes, just as Morgan Kell studied to know me and used that knowledge against me, so I studied him while on Echo 5. I know him. I share his abilities. Kell and I will meet again on Ride, Akira, and there we will destroy one another. Warrior, Coup, The Warrior Trilogy, Book 3, page 102, by Michael A. Stackpole.
Stomping forward on the timeline to 3052, ComStar wanted to get in on the fun with their own upgrade to the Noble Warhammer intended to be put to use against the looming clan threat. The Warhammer 7CS upgrade reflected the considerable resources that ComStar had on hand to throw at the problem. The most significant change with the 7CS was the installation of a 280 extra light fusion engine which weighed just 8 tons but maintained the original movement profile. 4 Anderson 398 jump jets were added as well, creating our first official leaping Warhammer variant. 17 double heatsinks were added to keep the mech running and gunning, and part of the mass savings from the XL engine was spent on adding 4 additional tons of armor, bringing the mech's total to 14 or 217 points of protection. Twin ERPPCs split between the arms dominated the build, though they were backed up by 4 standard medium lasers split between the side torsos, and 3 Streak SRM-2 launchers set into the right torso and fed by a single ton of ammunition protected by case. What the 7CS Warhammer ended up being used for was a surprisingly mobile ERPPC platform which could be set up in ambush for clan forces on Tukayyid, firing and then leaping to retreat before taking damage in response. These hit-and-run tactics befuddled and enraged the clans during the trial, who were expecting the ComGuard to come out and have a straight-up brawl for Terra. The ComGuard would not be granting that wish. One notable mech warrior was Adept Epsilon 6 Marcia Mercado, who had a great day when encountering the Jade Falcons during the trial, or at least it started out as a great day. It seemed that her PPC shots were always landing true, hitting multiple Falcon mechs in their cockpits, sometimes disabling the mechs and sometimes just wounding them so severely that they were forced to fall back. When her Warhammer was eventually disabled, Mercado was captured and quickly demanded to be made a bondsman and then given the opportunity to be a warrior for the clan. Finding her boldness and arrogance amusing, the Falcons granted her wish, though at the trial, Mercado's PPC shots missed her target's cockpit and she was sent to live the rest of her days in the Laborer caste. I don't dislike the Warhammer 7CS, I mean it has jump jets after all, but keep in mind it's much more of a glass cannon than its previous iterations. A savvy mech warrior who knows how to take advantage of its agility could be quite successful with it. Rose scanned the remains of the battlefield, prepared to continue the fight. Esmeralda and her Warhammer stood on the far edge of the arena among the remains of the charger she had fought. Her mech's remaining arm had impaled the charger's chest, evidently destroying its gyro, but the charger's repeated attacks had destroyed the Warhammer's right leg. She made no effort to disentangle herself because removing her mech's PPC from the charger's chest would no doubt have sent her crippled mech to the ground. Main event, page 128 and 129 by James D. Long. Starting in the 3060s and continuing for the next few decades, there was a flurry of development in various Warhammer upgrades, variants, and refits. Many of them were sourced from the Starcore Industries program, which managed to wrangle the focus and resources of 4 of the company's divisions and aim them toward this single goal. That goal was to take the Warhammer and make sure it would continue to be a fearsome presence on battlefields well into the future. Rumor has it that these meetings between Starcore Industries leadership and engineering teams became a week-long retreat with a festival atmosphere. Once the mayhem ended and everyone returned to their respective realms, there were plans to produce a new Warhammer frame, which could then be customized to meet the needs and preferences of each of the 4 markets that Starcore served. The WHM-8D was the Crofton-produced version, and it reflects well the basis for the other variants, though risk tolerance will impact loadouts and structural changes. Starting with the Star Frame Heavy Endosteel frame, the 280 Fusion engine was retained for the 8D. 13.5 tons of standard plate armor provided 216 points of protection in an entirely new layout, which gave the new generation of Warhammers a totally unique appearance. The loadout for the 8D remained a nod toward the original Warhammers, with twin ERPPCs split between the arms, 2 ER medium lasers and 2 ER small lasers occupying spots in the side torsos. A Streak SRM-6 grabbed a place of prominence high up on that right shoulder. Its 1 ton of ammunition was moved to the right torso where the mech could be protected by case. Finally, a C3 slave computer was added to the head open critical location so it could take advantage of the C3 networking, which was all the rage at the time. The 17 double heat sinks were adequate for general use, leaving the mech running heat negative at long range. Only up close would the mech warrior have to make a choice about laying off one of the ERPPCs in favor of the other lasers and missile launcher. The options are many and the build is pretty flexible. Overall, the 8D is a solid evolution for the Warhammer, though I know some people remain a little wary of the new look. It's not the fault for Chris Lewis's line art, it's pretty cool, it's solid on its own. But some just love that classic Warhammer look a little bit more. The Steiner version for the new Warhammer produced on Sonoa took the bold leap of sticking with the standard structure and carrying 13 tons of standard armor. I know, wow. However, since the Lyrans were the source of the brand new light fusion engine technology, the 9S was given this new trinket. The light fusion engine split the difference between an inner sphere grade XL engine and the standard version, shaving the required number of side torso critical locations to 2, but only being 75% of the mass of a standard engine instead of the XL's 50. The Warhammer 9S carried 2 ER PPCs split between the arms, 2 ER medium lasers set into the center torso, and a Streak SRM-6 was in its traditional location in the right torso. Its ammunition was stored in the right torso along with case. The Mech's 20 double heatsinks were more than adequate to handle shots with the PPCs and medium lasers, only ending up in 2+ into the red while on the run. Adding in the occasional locked Streak SRM-4 launch would put things in a rougher territory, but sometimes the Streak SRM juice is worth the squeeze. The Capellan version of the machine was designated the WHM-4L, just to be deliberately confusing I suppose, which is actually on brand because this is our first Operation Sneaky Sneak Warhammer of the day. It took advantage of 13.5 tons of stealth armor and a Guardian ECM in the center torso to make running this thing down a challenge. The 4L did carry an XL engine to buy mass for the loadout, which isn't as terrible in conjunction with the ECM and stealth armor. Twin ERPPCs once again were split between the arms, and a Streak SRM-6 launcher sat in the right torso along with its ammunition and case. This time, 4 medium pulse lasers fill out the rest of the build, scattered 1 to each arm, the left torso, and the mech's open head critical location. I suppose that makes it an emotional support medium pulse laser? Let's get a ruling from the judge.
The court rules it is acceptable.
Thank you, Judge Minifrog. The Warhammer 4L is a unique beast, but if you're looking to try out stealth armor in a fight for the first time, it's not a bad example of the technology in action. Before we move much further down the timeline, we do need to talk about the Lich. I've mentioned it before in a previous video, but since it's technically a Warhammer, we're going to have to take the opportunity to bring it up again. When a mech warrior named Francis Indigo defeated another gladiator piloting a Highlander 736 with relative ease, eyes fell on this newcomer piloting a very odd-looking Warhammer variant. While Frankenmechs were hardly unusual in gladiatorial games, Indigo's WHM X7 Warhammer was a particularly odd example of the phenomena. Constructed from the torso of a Phoenix Project-era Warhammer, possibly a 9S, the Warhammer X7 was powered by a 280 light fusion engine which was armored. This pushed the normally reduced mass of 12 up to 17, but provided additional protection against engine critical hits. Even the mech's sensor package was given the armoring upgrade. The use of a heavy-duty gyro, 12.5 tons of light ferrofibrous armor, and an armored cockpit made the Lich a very tough battle mech. The technological advancements continued with the weaponry, which included 2 capacitor-boosted snub-nosed PPCs split between the arms, 4 ER medium lasers scattered across the mech's body, and a Clan Streak SRM-6 was set into the traditional right shoulder along with its ammunition and case too. The Warhammer X7 was an odd-looking machine. The mixture of Warhammer, Marauder, and Novacat parts gave it an ungainly appearance that flies in the face of its reinforced structure. Though Starcore Industries denied any involvement in producing this one-of-a-kind machine, rumors persisted and evidence such as the lead technician's curious similarity in appearance to the well-known Starcore lead designer suggests there might be something funny going on. The plot thickens. The Lich is a wild machine and one that would be a trip to try out on the tabletop where you can wrap your brain around some of the rules for this newer technology. If you want to give it a try, the record sheet for it is available on FlexSheet's website. In the third to last official Warhammer variant we're going to cover today, we have to travel out to the Taurian Concordat, where Taurus Territorial Industries managed to piece together a curiously advanced version of our noble battlemech. The WHM-11T was introduced in 3084 and it included a variety of advanced, if pricey, features, including an extra light fusion engine, 5 improved jump jets, and 10.5 tons of light ferrofibrous armor. The 465 movement profile for the 11T paints a picture of a very agile Warhammer. The loadout leans into this with 2 snub-nosed PPCs split between the arms that benefit from a very strong range profile that has them in short range at just 9 hexes away from the target. The PPCs are backed up by 2 light PPCs, also split between the arms for an additional 5 damage per shot. 2 ER medium lasers were split between the torsos, further compounding an opponent's worries, and finally a flexible multi-missile 5 launcher was installed into the right torso along with 2 tons of case-protected ammunition. The 11T's 13 double heatsinks were adequate for moderate use of the energy weapon heavy loadout. This shockingly advanced Periphery battlemech was quickly snapped up by the Taurian Defense Force and has become a popular flagship design for Taurus territorial industries. The only downside is that the design is being jealously guarded and isn't likely to be exported to any of the neighboring powers. With amazing speed, the Annihilator brought its left arm around and clubbed Esmeralda in the chest. Although the inhibitors of the assault mech softened the blow somewhat, the front of the Warhammer buckled inward. Rose screamed a curse and tried to close on the Annihilator, but Esmeralda was closer. Swinging from the waist, she drove the Warhammer's right PPC into the Annihilator's head, lancing the cockpit amid a shower of sparks and smoke. Main event, page 192 by James D. Long. The last of today's Warhammer variants are two of the three most recently created on the timeline. The first is the Warhammer 8R, which first stomped off the assembly lines in 3090. This Ronin incorporated design was a return to form for the Warhammer with a loadout very similar to the original but with updated technology. If we're looking to take the original and find its ideal form, the 8R might be it. Constructed from reinforced 270 endosteel and a Magna standard 280 fusion engine, we're already off to a good start. The 13 tons of standard plate armor offered decent coverage, and the 16 double heatsinks will be getting some use. 2 Fusagon Longtooth ERPPCs were added in their traditional locations in the left and right arms to provide that long-range punch. At mid-range, 2 Magna Mark VI ER medium lasers were set between the side torsos, adding their reliable damage. At short range, 2 Magna Mark IV ER small lasers would make quick work of infantry or search for critical hits in already damaged components. They were bolstered by a pair of LFN Lindblad machine guns set into the side torsos and fed by a single ton of ammunition in the right torso. The expected Streak SRM-6 was also added to the right torso, along with its 1 ton of ammunition. All of the ammo located there was protected by Case 2. Overall, it's a very meat and potatoes Warhammer build, but one that lacks the significant drawbacks of the 500-year-old original. I'm personally a really big fan of it. The last official configuration we're going to tackle today arrives thanks to the Al-Shain weapons production lines on Tokdo within the Draconis Combine. The WHM-10K reflects the increasing presence of clan-grade technology within Inner Sphere battlemechs. It's a trend that I expect will continue as we move deeper into the IlClan era. The Warhammer 10K was constructed around an Al-Shain class 115-70H endo-composite frame and a 280 light fusion engine. It maintained the classic 460 movement profile but added 18 tons of ballistic reinforced armor, making this one tough cookie of facing opponents who think they're clever and are carrying Gauss rifles or autocannons. Looking at you, Fed Sons. The last notable hardware point is the swap to 16 clan-grade double heatsinks. As far as weaponry goes, it's a mixture of clan and Inner Sphere grade tech, starting with 2 Inner Sphere ERPPCs split between the arms. They're backed up by 2 standard medium lasers, nice to see those are still kicking around in the 32nd century, and 2 Inner Sphere grade ER small lasers. All 4 lasers were split between the left and right torsos. A Clan Streak SRM-6 was added to the right torso along with its 1 ton of ammunition in Clan Case 2. Finally, 2 Clan machine guns were added to the mech side torsos, fed by a half ton of ammunition in the Case 2 protected right torso. Overall, it's an interesting mix of weapons, which make the Warhammer 10K a danger at all ranges. The 16 double heatsinks allow it to operate without heat issues at range, and even close up on a target, laying off one of the PPCs is enough to bring every other weapon into play while still remaining cool. It's a savvy build and sure to give the Draconis Combine an edge in those IlClan era battles, or at least even the odds against the Rosselhog Dominion. Fathom to Tally, you hanging together? Just racking up a few more, came the clipped, lightly accented reply. Tally's Warhammer pivoted around the corner and sent 2 bolts of crackling energy at her target. A Shadowhawk, or at least what had started life as a Shadowhawk, buckled under the impact of concentrated ion fire. Sizzling and steaming, the battered mech crumpled to the ground in a heap, and Tally scratched another of her namesake onto the chalkboard hung in her cockpit. The Concordian Affair, Shrapnel number 19, page 8, by C.J. Ireland. Of course, since my ego has no measurable limits and I just can't help myself, I did take a crack at creating my own Warhammer 1MF variant for the IlClan era. I see it as a sub-variant of the Combine 10K that we just spoke about. This time, instead of the litany of clan short-range weaponry, we're going to go with a slightly different direction. First, the structural changes included a swap to 11.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor. 17 clan double heat sinks offer the chill attitude, but all else remains the same from the 10K. For weaponry, the 2 inner sphere grade ERPPCs in the arms are retained, but the rest of the build will be our own. The other prime weapon is the Advanced Tactical Missile 9 launcher placed into the right torso and fed by 3 tons of Clan Case 2 protected ammunition. This allows for all ranges contributions to the fight depending upon the ammunition used. The addition of a Clan SRM-6 launcher in the right torso along with its 1 ton of ammunition is a nod to the original design, as well as the Clan Medium Pulse Laser added to the left torso. Finally, in emotional support, Clan ER Small Laser was added to the open head critical location. Heat management is similar to the 10Ks, and holding off on that 1 ERPPC when in close combat will allow the use of everything else. While at long range, firing both PPCs while on the run would be heat neutral, but including that ATM-9 into the mix pushes the heat to 4+ into the red. Not too shabby and entirely manageable. I think the 10K 1MF would be fun to play, possibly in tandem with the official 10K in a lance. 4 ERPPCs in the ATM-9 would be a fun approach for an enemy. If you're up for giving it a try, I've included the PDF record sheet for it in a Dropbox link in this video's notes. So why do we love the Warhammer? Oh, so many reasons. The aesthetic appeal can't be ignored, and of course it has played such a pivotal role in the story of Battletech the game. Both in and out of the universe, the Warhammer is one of the best known battlemechs for good reason. In fact, since I teased it all week on the Discord channel, I want to take a minute to share my favorite Warhammer story. It requires taking a big leap back in time to the Reunification War, where the fledgling Star League was spending a considerable amount of time and effort forcing the Periphery nations into joining the League. It was a tantalizing offer, either join the Star League or be forced to at the end of a PPC barrel. Still, the Periphery nations were not too keen on the idea. What isn't often known or discussed during the Reunification War is all the internal political conflicts that played out behind the scenes as the armies of the Inner Sphere were out playing in the Periphery. For the Lyran Commonwealth, the political intrigue was fed by the aspirations of the Estates General, the Lyran legislative body, and the fact that the Archon, Viola Dennison, had been out fighting alongside her troops instead of making sure everyone at home was behaving themselves. She had left her son, Kevin Dennison, in charge, but he was easily sidelined by the representatives of the Estates General who wanted to expand their power in the Archon's absence. A 20-member committee sought to move the Lyran Commonwealth away from the Star League, possibly breaking entirely from it in the future. When the Archon's son disappeared before an important discussion on the topic, chaos descended upon the Lyran government. When the Archon heard of the issues back home, she turned around, and with her personal troops along for the ride, they tore across Lyran space toward Tharkad, taking time to stop at various planets where her anger could be vented on the assets of her troublesome legislators. When the steering committee eventually felt they were ready for a vote to leave the Star League, the timing couldn't have been worse for the upstart bureaucrats. As the meeting started, Archon Dennison's dropships descended upon Tharkad. When news of their arrival reached the conspirators, it was already too late to stuff the cork back in the bottle. As Viola marched in her Warhammer toward the assembly building, many of the conspirators fled in vain hope of escaping the consequences of their plotting. The Speaker of the Assembly, a fellow named Graf Henry Graham, sought to undo some of the damage by retrieving Dennison's son from where he had been held captive. But his hopes of clemency were dashed. Standing in the courtyard of the building, he was defiant as the Archon's Warhammer marched closer. It said that he began a speech touting the need for freedom and independence, but the specifics were lost to history when the Archon crushed him under the foot of her Warhammer. I think this story is a good example of why we love the Warhammer, because these are exactly the sort of shenanigans we expect from it. It's a battlemech that has high utility, powerful weapons, and a certain swagger shared only by a select few others like the Night Sky and Marauder. Be it in the hands of a Draconis Combine warrior or the Ginger Klansman who looks good on a propaganda poster, the Warhammer is going to make sure something interesting happens. It's that friend in the group who doesn't go into an evening with a plan, but you know their presence is going to lead to something memorable. And that's why we love the Warhammer. What do you think? Is the Warhammer a common choice for your matches and campaigns, or has its charm faded in favor of newer and shinier objects? Let me know in the comments. If you have a favorite variant that I didn't cover today, I'd like to know which has your favor. To everyone on the Discord who shared their awesome painted up Warhammers this week, thank you for making this job fun. It's always a blast to see all the creative ways you choose to slap paint on these little plastic buggers. Also, thank you Mini Frog and Big Red 40 Tech for offering their talented voices for today's video as well. If you felt the video was worthy, please don't forget to click on the like and subscribe button so that YouTube knows that it's worth showing to others who might not yet know the nonsense that goes on here. It's mostly painless. If you want to go one step further and directly support the channel by throwing a few bucks my way each month, that would help me make the argument with the folks in the Mech Frog compound that the venture is worth the effort for a little longer. I really appreciate it. I know times are tough and have been for the last few years. Please take care of yourselves and your loved ones. You absolutely matter. Now go and make sure the world is a slightly better place today and tomorrow.